In this lesson, I'll explain the future tense of the Latin verb, the future tense of the indicative active regular verb. Let us begin by looking at the usual table of paradigms or conjugations. Here it is. These are the future tense verbs in Latin. Let us now see how the future tense is formed for some of the verbs. With some of the verbs, the future tense is formed as follows. You have the root, which is the basic idea of the verb, and this hardly ever changes. Indeed, in the future tense, it never changes. You have the connecting vowel, and if you have followed the earlier lessons in this course, you will know why this exists. It exists in order to make a nicer join between the root and the other parts of the verb. You have a tense marker, which shows when the action of the verb is taking place. And again, if you have seen the imperfect tense lecture, you will know how the tense marker works. And then you have the personal ending, which shows you who is doing the action of the verb. Here is the first Latin verb that I want to look at, amabit. He or she likes or loves. This is formed in the following way. Here is the root, am. Here is the connecting vowel, are. Here is the tense marker, be. And here is the personal ending, amabit. We can say then that with verbs of the amo kind, or of the first conjugation, the future tense is made as follows. You have the root plus the connecting vowel plus the tense marker plus the personal ending. And notice the tense marker here. It is be, bi. Contrast this with the ba for the imperfect tense. Let us now construct the usual table to see how the future tense is formed across the various conjugations. Here is the usual order of persons. Here is the root, am. To this, as said, we attach the connecting vowel. To this, as said again, we attach the tense marker, which for the first person singular, the I part of the verb, only has the consonant B. The I is cut off because amabio doesn't seem to work, or at least it didn't seem to work for the Romans. And so we attach to all of that the usual personal ending, O, giving us amabo. Nothing difficult there, and so we shall construct the whole table without further comment. Amabo, amabis, amabit, amabimus, amabitis, amabunt. Oh, there is one further comment. Notice the they part of the verb, the third person plural. The tense marker here changes from bi to bu. This appears to be for purely verbal reasons. For whatever reason, the Romans didn't like the sound amabint. They preferred amabunt. If you are learning Latin to read the language, be aware of this and pay no further attention to it. If you are learning Latin to write the language, then this is something that you will need to learn. This being said, let us move to the next verb in our table. Monebo, constructed on exactly the same principle as the amo type verb. There it is, and I think here no further comment is required. So far, you may be justified in thinking, that's it. That is the future tense, as regular and as easy as the imperfect tense. Remember, the imperfect tense can always be spotted because it has the BA tense marker. In these two paradigms of verbs, the amo and monotypes, it seems to be exactly the same with the future tense, but instead of BA, we have BI, and there is a slight variation for the first person singular, the I part of the verb, insofar as the I is cut off, and there is another variation at the end of the paradigm with the they part of the verb, the third person plural, where the I becomes a you. But apart from that, as said, as regular and as simple as the imperfect tense. Sadly, it isn't as easy as that. For whatever reason, and this has to do with the evolution of Latin before it became a written language, for whatever reason, the future tense is not as simple or as regular as the imperfect. Let us move to audio type verbs. There you have your root, but that doesn't say much because all tenses have a root. There is your connecting vowel, or rather, here now is your set of connecting vowels, audia. To this you attach the personal ending, audiam, I listen or I hear. No tense marker. Yes, no tense marker. You need perhaps to hold on to that connecting vowel or set of connecting vowels, and perhaps that will give you the thread that leads you to the future tense of this verb. No such luck. You singular are hearing or thou hearest. Audies. A different set of connecting vowels. Audiet. We'll ignore that the E in audiet is short. Audiemus, audietis, audient. Not as regular as we might expect, and certainly not as regular as you might wish. Before I make any further comment, let's proceed to the next set in the table. Capiam. That's formed on the same principle as audiam. Some regularity at least. Capies, capiet, capiemus, capietis, capient. There is some regularity there so far as it does follow the same pattern as audio type verbs. We might say then, ignoring amo and monio type verbs, which in the future tense are constructed on a different principle, we might say that capio and audio type verbs are constructed in this way. There is no tense marker. The connecting vowel is ia, ia, for the first person singular, and the connecting vowel for all other parts of the verb is ie. Although this is not as reassuring as with the imperfect tense, there is something reasonably regular here, and something to which you can lay reasonable hold. Those two connecting vowels, that they do tend to be individual to the future tense. Except for first person singular present subjunctives, there are no other forms in the language that look like these. And so you can, in effect, take ie as the tense marker, as well as the connecting vowel for these future tenses, though making sure to remember that for the first person singular, for the I part of the verb, it is not ie but ia. Let's have another look at it. Yes, do have a look at it, and look for the patterns. This being done, let us turn to the last verb in our table, rego, or rego-type verbs, or third conjugation verbs. You have the root and you have the connecting vowel, and this is not the connecting vowel that you might expect, but it is a connecting vowel. To this, you add the personal ending directly. So regam, I rule. Reges, and we might as well complete the table. Have a look at this and try to look for the patterns. Ignore the first two conjugations, those are simple. Amo and monio type verbs, those are simple future tenses. Capio and audio type verbs, those have rather tricky future tenses, but as long as you hang on to those sets of connecting vowels, you will hardly ever go wrong. With rego in the future tense, it is difficult. Let's isolate it and have a look at it. Regam, reges, reget, regemus, regetis, regent. Before you tell yourself, for the future tense, this is the connecting vowel that I need to memorize, or these are the two connecting vowels I need to memorize, because it is not as easy as that. Let us go back to the first lesson in this course when we looked at the present tense. Let's have a look at monio. Monio, mones, monet, monemus, monetis, monent. Can you see the problem? Let's put the two side by side. Here's the present tense of monio, and here's the future tense of rego. Except for the first person singular, the I part of the verb, where you have monio and regam, not easy to confuse. Once you get below the first person singular, you have absolutely identical forms. This, I agree, is a problem. It is not an impossible problem. In practice, you will not often go wrong, and bear in mind that although the present tense, the imperfect, the perfect, etc., although the other tenses are used quite often in written Latin, unless you are reading a collection of letters, or more particularly a play, if you are reading a history or a speech in Latin, you will not often encounter the future tense, and so when you find a verb with these particular endings, it is a reasonable presumption that you are looking at a present tense. But although the future tense is not often used, it is used, and so if you want to avoid confusing the two tenses together, and I suppose you can often avoid this by looking at the context in which the verb is used, but if you want to make sure to avoid confusing these two tenses together, the only solution, I'm afraid, is to look at this best approximation to a rule. For the future tense of rego verbs, there is no tense marker. The connecting vowel is A for the first person singular, and the connecting vowel for all other parts is E. In other words, it's identical almost to the present tense of monio. To avoid confusing monemus, we warn or advise, with regemus, we shall rule, I'm afraid the only solution is to know which conjugation a verb falls into. There is, in any language, an irreducible minimum of rote learning. And although with the Latin tenses you can get a long way by looking for patterns and memorizing the variants, there are times when old-fashioned brute memorization is essential, and where third conjugation future tenses are concerned, you do need to know that any particular verb is in the third conjugation. Otherwise, although as said, ambiguity in practice is not that common, there is a potential for ambiguity, and so the only way to avoid ambiguity here is to learn which conjugation any particular verb falls into. Here, as ever, is the frequency chart for Latin verbs. Amo and monio-type verbs together make up more than half of the Latin verbs, and audio-type verbs another 6%, and so you are looking at a high proportion of Latin verbs which have easily identifiable future tenses, but where rego-type verbs are concerned, and those form about a third of the whole, you will, as I have said, need to know which conjugation a verb falls into if you are to avoid ambiguity. Here once again is the entire table, hyphenated and color-coded. I do advise you to look at this and to spend a lot of time looking at it. The tense is not as chaotic as it may seem on first inspection, but there are potential difficulties with identifying the future tense with rego-type verbs, and for this reason, as I keep on saying, it is important that when you learn a verb, when you look it up in a dictionary and see its meaning, you should also take a mental note of its conjugation. If it is a third conjugation verb, or if it is a rego-type verb, the future tense will often look like the present tense of monio. Thank you for listening to this lesson.